Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Oracle Enterprise Manager Technical Webcast Series. Our topic for today is Supercharge your DevOps automation using Enterprise Manager's CLI and REST APIs. My name is Martin Pena, and I'm a product manager here at Oracle headquarters. I'm pleased today to have a couple of our database as a service experts with us. Pat Combs, who's going to be our primary presenter, is part of the pre-sales team in North America, leading up the cloud POC implementation team. Also with us is Subhadeep Sengupta. He's a product manager on my team responsible for technical lead as the database as a service and snap clone area. Let's start out with a little bit of an introduction in terms of the safe harbor statement. I'm sure many of you have seen this before, so just take a second to read this, please. And then before I turn it over to Pat, just wanted to note that we do have some content posted already on Oracle Technology Network. We have a Database as a Service REST API cookbook. The URL is here, and you can download this, which will be a great takeaway reference from this webcast. I'll post the URL in the chat as well. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and switch presenter roles over to Pat and let him go ahead and provide an introduction. Before he does that, I just want to mention in terms of Q&A and questions, we do have the WebEx chat feature available. Feel free to post any questions there. While Pat is speaking, Subhadeep and I will be monitoring the chat, and if we can, we'll post any responses during the session. And if we have at any time at the end, we'll also open the phones up to Q&A for live questions as well. So with that, Pat, please go ahead.
Martin, thank you so much, and thank you so much as well, everybody, for attending. So today, again, very interesting topic. A lot of things are out there in Enterprise Manager as it relates to capabilities, but really we want to focus on really the full integration and the enablement of DevOps. So we're going to provide a quick overview of Enterprise Manager. Talk a little bit about DevOps and integration. What does that mean? It's a great buzzword these days. A lot of things are happening in this space. Full automation is absolutely where our customers want to go. So we want to talk a little bit about the tools that are out there, how we integrate with those tools, and how that's going to take effect. And then more specifically, around Enterprise Manager and DevOps, what does this really mean? How can it help you automate the provisioning of the resources and requirements for your development organizations? How can we manage these things? How can we maintain IT currency? I'll look at a bit of the security around that, how that happens. Then we're going to look at it. We're going to actually execute the RESTful API, do a demo of a few things that I use on a regular basis, give you some understanding of best practices around that, and then we're going to look at the RESTful API cookbook that Martin had mentioned earlier, really just providing a nice roadmap on an implementation of the RESTful API and the EM's command line interface in conjunction with integration tools, source control tools, things of that nature, and of course Q&A. So let's talk a little bit about Enterprise Manager. So for those of you who have been exposed to Enterprise Manager for a long time, you've seen the evolution of Enterprise Manager from many, many years ago, from 10 to 11, and then 12, and then, of course, 13C. Again, new features, functionality come out on a regular basis. 13C is a fantastic write of the latest version of Enterprise Manager. The UI is more streamlined, is a little cleaner. So I encourage you to take a look at Enterprise Manager 13 as soon as possible if you haven't already looked at it. Some great new features are there in 13C. One of the big ones is the always-on monitoring feature, which is something that myself as a customer of Enterprise Manager and a user of Enterprise Manager, as well as all of our other customers, have been looking for a while. So that's there. And again, we've expanded the capability as it relates to the management of the full integrated stack. So again, it's really critical for us to understand what's happening across the entire stack. And this also includes cloud lifecycle management. What's happening in the cloud, whether it be private cloud or public cloud. Enterprise Manager 13 does support true hybrid. So I encourage you to take a look at Enterprise Manager if you haven't already done so. I would get it installed in a little sandbox, if you will, sort of kick the tires on it and take a look at it, because there's a lot of new features and functionality there. More specifically, let's talk a little bit about DevOps and how do you start this? Where do you start? I mean, where are you going to go with this? What do you want to do with it? What are the integration opportunities? And when you look at all the things that are out there, from a DevOps perspective, there's a lot on the map here, from source control to configuration management, development tools, integration, continuous delivery, containers. And there's a lot of tools out there, but if you're not integrated and you're not working with a solution that's going to sort of pull these together in a seamless transaction, then you've got to find something to do with this, and it becomes very cumbersome. So what we really wanted to do with the APIs and Enterprise Manager is provide that fully automated end-to-end solution. So integration with things like Puppet, Chef, source control systems as an example, continuous delivery integration. We wanted it to be very flexible and give you the capability to provide a fully integrated end-to-end solution. So as an example, if a developer was looking for a particular database based on a source control, a set of source control or code within a source control system they had checked out, you would be able to integrate with Enterprise Manager via EM command line interface or the RESTful API to provision the requirements for that particular source control that was checked out of the source control system as an example. And then, of course, with Puppet and Chef, with configuration management and Ansible as an example for deployments, we wanted to provide a capability to be no-touch. We've got a lot of customers out there now that have a lot of these solutions in place, and we want to work with those solutions. This is not something that you're looking to replace. We're looking to plug into everything you have, integrate with the solutions you have, and provide that seamless solution so you can take full advantage of things that are elsewhere in Enterprise Manager around configuration management as well as monitoring and things of that nature. So provide a centralized solution to sort of assist with the orchestration and integrate with the orchestration tools you already have on the floor today. So let's talk a little bit about Enterprise Manager and sort of how this integrates and how it affects the organization, quite frankly. So when you look at the segregation of duties and you look at what we're trying to achieve here, what we really want to do is give the cloud administrator, who quite frankly is a DBA. Let's be honest. This individual knows Enterprise Manager, understands the flow of database provisioning and things of that nature. So a cloud administrator or a DBA administrator that's on staff today could easily take control of things like pool creations, quota administration, service templates. What we wanted to do is provide an orchestration solution via RESTful API that would give you the capability to automate the creation of all these things as things hit the floor. So if you had a new group of infrastructure components, whether they be physical or virtual, we wanted to be able to automate the creation of the pool of resources for database as a service in one fell swoop as an example, and that's what you see here, making it ready for database provisioning at that point. Then if you look at it from an end user perspective, it's even further simplified because we also wanted to provide a solution that was going to fully integrate with whatever orchestration solution you have today and provide very few questions for that particular individual to ask for a particular database. Or again, as we talked about earlier from a source control perspective, if they checked out some code and there was a particular database, middleware stack, and application that was pertained to that particular code, we want to automate that in the back end so that the end user simply receives a notification that the database and the wider infrastructure or the wider stack is available for them to develop against or execute testing against. So really what we wanted to do is look at it from two different perspectives. Fully automating the creation of the assets required to implement something like database as a service specifically, and then further automate and simplify that via APIs from an end user perspective, because what we're seeing is a lot of customers who are customizing portals as an example. They have a flavor of portal that they want to use, which is fantastic. We want to provide that plugin or that integration with the RESTful API to fully automate that so it looks seamless to the end user. Although things are happening underneath the covers as it relates to the integration with Enterprise Manager, the end user's experience is exactly the same regardless of what sort of asset they're asking for. So as you look at the roles, and this is further defines it in another fashion, the end user is development. They want a database. They want an asset quickly. They want to be able to manage it at a very basic level, and they want to be able to delete it, self-service deletion. So as an end user, I'm asking for a database. I'm not necessarily asking for an infrastructure component. I don't really care, quite frankly, where the database resides, as long as I get the database I need within the pool of resources that I need it in. And then once that service is available, I need to be able to access it, shut it down, start it up at a very basic level, look at some very basic statistical information around performance, and so I can execute against that particular environment as I see fit. Again, it's all about self-service. And then finally, what I want to do is I want to be able to self-delete that database. I don't want to have to go ask somebody when I'm finished with that resource. And what we're finding is it's changing the behavior of the organizations. And so what we're seeing is increase of utilization of resources at the infrastructure level because individuals are moving in and out of the pools, and they're using things as they need them and not letting things sit around. So it really is liberating to the development organization so that they have the capability to create things they need, increases the capability to move things to market faster, and that's really what it's all about, providing a self-service opportunity. And again, from a development perspective, we wanted to also provide that integration via RESTful API. And if you look at it from an administrator's perspective on the ops side, again, it's all about ensuring that we have the assets on the floor, we have the resources available so that we can provide quick and easy implementation of whatever the development organization needs, as well as administering things around quotas, as an example, creating the service templates that are the latest and greatest for the organization. Fleet maintenance, which is a fantastic opportunity for what we call sort of self-service patching, if you will. What essentially happens here is that I've got an opportunity to let the end user move their database from one Oracle home that would be, let's say, base, to another Oracle home with the latest PSU as an example, patch set update, which also includes the security updates. So it's, we're providing this portal, if you will, or this integration with the RESTful API to enable the end user to self-service. And this is really what it's all about. And again, full integration with the current things you have on the floor around orchestration, specific to, say, Puppet, Chef, or Ansible as an example. And so what we have here is a really nice marrying of the two APIs because they feed into each other. And as we go through the demonstration, you'll see what I'm talking about. There are certain things I'm going to use to gather information specific to infrastructure components for CLI, and then I'm going to incorporate those pieces into the JSON bodies or the bodies themselves of the RESTful calls to enable the execution of a creation of a service template as an example, creation of databases as an example, deletion of databases as an example. And then, of course, all the things on the back end through the CLI as it relates to administration pieces. So what you see here is really a holistic solution that will incorporate not only the administration of the private cloud with a fully automated integrated API, but also the end user experience, giving the user the capability as indicated via the RESTful API. And so if we look more specifically at EM's command line interface, what this enables you to do is fully provision all of the things that are needed on an infrastructure environment. So as an example, let's say we recently received 4 operating systems that are managed targets in Enterprise Manager, whether they be physical or virtual, doesn't really matter. We've got an agent sitting out there. We've got a managed asset in Enterprise Manager. What you see here is EM's command line interface provisioning the 11204 grid infrastructure, Oracle Home, which includes the build of ASM, on that particular host you see here. So we set up these things in the software library. So they're centralized so that we don't have to worry about pulling these from different locations. Enterprise Manager manages this for you automatically in the centralized library. And then we can install these with baseline standards for configuration. So this really provides an opportunity for the cloud administrator to standardize across the entire landscape. So we've got the same Oracle homes, the same versions on particular environments. We've got some same configuration details. All of the things in the ASM environment are the same as it relates to the groups, if you will. So all those things are standardized. And then we pool these assets as indicated earlier so that we can take full advantage of the infrastructure that we have, maximize the utilization of resources, and sometimes increasing those resources as it relates to utilization upwards of 80%, 80 to 90%. And this is what we actually saw internally at Oracle. So it was very, very significant for us. And so we provision these through the EM CLI. So if you think about this, if we looked at something from an infrastructure perspective around, let's say, VMware's vCAC, the Automation Center, if we were to provision a VM template automatically, as an example, through that particular engine, we could call EM CLI to provision all of the Oracle assets required for the database, rack database environment with no hands, no touch, as well as set up access. And of course, we've got the capability to set up chargeback and metering and showback plans, if you will. So this is the first piece of fully integrated, full automation. This is the first step when you start talking about integration with the things we saw earlier around Puppet, Chef, Ansible, automation tools, orchestration tools. This is the first piece. Once this is finished, we then incorporate this into databases of service through the RESTful API. And so we can control what you're executing, whether it be through the UI, which is out of the box for Enterprise Manager, which is the self-service portal, or as we are going to talk about here shortly, the command line interface, or the API itself, or the RESTful API. So what we're going to do is once we get that infrastructure completed, we then would incorporate those assets into a zone, incorporate that database home into a pool, and then create the service templates that are going to enable the users to access that particular environment in a fully automated fashion as indicated via an orchestration tool. So if we look more specifically at the APIs for database as a service, certainly the building and creation of zones, templates, service instances, creation of databases themselves, obviously. We talked about deleting the services themselves, extending the service, because we can fully automate the deletion of the database. We can set parameters within the service templates that indicate when that database would be deleted. And prior to the deletion, we can also set up a pre-delete script that would back it up, as an example. And of course, deploying those databases, requesting databases, pluggable databases, because if you look at the infrastructure for the zones, we've got database pools and pluggable pools, which would be containers, schema as a service, and we can track those. So as we create this and we look at the UI, or excuse me, we look at the RESTful API in the demonstration, you'll see where I can status the build to the user. So we could provide a framework around that would give them the capability to see where their build is and what the status is. And of course, managing those. We can certainly stop and start databases through the RESTful API, backup databases, create snapshots for thin provisioning, and then we can take a look at the chargeback and metering details as well. So we wanted to provide a fully functioning, very rich RESTful API to fully automate end-to-end. And again, as indicated, we've got a lot of customers that are working towards that with the EM command line interface and the RESTful API, fully automating and fully integrating. So if you look at database as a service, we're providing you that capability to be more efficient, use assets more efficiently, as I talked about earlier, increasing utilization of resources. We want it to be accessible very easily, very quickly, through whatever orchestration solution you see fit. Wanted to be able to move quickly to expand, scale up, scale down, relocate. These are things we wanted to provide in Enterprise Manager's database as a service, and in turn as well the RESTful API and the EM command line interface. Wanted to be able to track things. So I will access the UI for Enterprise Manager 13 only as a reference to sort of validate what we did through the RESTful API, because everything we do through the RESTful API is recorded and tracked through Enterprise Manager. It's no different than the UI. You'll see when I log into Enterprise Manager's RESTful API, I still have to authenticate. So just because I have access to a portal, I still have to authenticate into Enterprise Manager, which you'll see. And again, as we're talking about today, we want to make sure we can integrate. So quite frankly, for us in the end, it really doesn't matter which tool you want to use to integrate with Enterprise Manager. These are open standard APIs. You can integrate with virtually any solution that you see fit. We'll take a look at the EM command line interface as well, give you some examples of what that looks like and how it would interface with the RESTful API. And then I've also created a script that we'll take a look at, a basic K-shell script that does a curl call, so you can see the integration at that level where you could start slicing and dicing and parsing things out for that particular user that logged into Enterprise Manager, or if you were logging into the RESTful API as a privileged user to administer the cloud assets. And finally, this is a really great summary because, again, there's a lot of ways to integrate with Enterprise Manager. We're going to talk more specifically about the RESTful API and the EM command line interface, but I thought it would be important to note all of the opportunities of integration with Enterprise Manager. So EM will plug in and send data and integrate with data anywhere you see fit to provide that holistic picture of everything in your particular IT environment. So with that being said, let's take a look at what this RESTful API does and some of the capabilities there. So I'm going to jump out and take a quick look. Now we've got Enterprise Manager 13C here, and again, we'll look at this only as a reference. What I like to use is Postman. Postman is free, comes from Google, integrates with Google Chrome, and it's really nice because it gives you the capability to save calls and reference those. So what you see here is an initial get to the home page, if you will, for the RESTful API. So we're going to log in to Enterprise Manager 13 with Sysman in this particular case. Now I have an end user that we're also going to use to request database assets. So we're going to click a send here real quick. Now you look at the basic headers here. We're going to click send, and what it does is it logs in based on the authentication here and gives me an overview of what's available for this particular user. So as Sysman, I've got pretty much everything in that particular world, but you see zones here. This is a particular zone that was created in Enterprise Manager for database as a service. We've got database templates that we'll use later on, and you see a number of templates that are available here. And then it also gives me an overview of the things that have been executed for that particular user. So we've got the family of opportunity here as well, but we also see service requests and the status. So as you look at integrating this with your particular portal as an example, or an orchestration solution, this is the first place you're going to go. You're going to authenticate into the basic home page, if you will, for the RESTful API. And if you wanted to display these things to the users as it relates to the recent requests, whether they were successful or failed or whatever the status might be, you can absolutely do that here. So staying in as Sysman, what I want to do is take a look at now, how do I create a service template as one example of how to use the RESTful API. So I'm going to click on my call here to post, and I'm going to look at my headers, and there's some standard headers here. No surprises here. But I want to look at the body, because the body is where everything is really happening, obviously. So if I look at integration with this, and I look at how I would do this as an IT organization, I would provide input variables. So as an example, as an end user, I would provide the name, or as a cloud administrator, excuse me, I would provide the name of the service template that I wanted to create. So let's say as an example, we wanted to create Final 3. We've got some standard input variables here. We've got roles that are available to assign to the service template. We've got the value here for the cloud zone and the pool. Now this is pulled from software pool. So if we go to another tab and pull the software pools based on that authentication for Sysman, you'll see I've got a number of pools here. I've got an HR pool zone, I've got an HR pool, I've got a financial pool. This is the ID that we're pulling to pull into this particular call. So this is a sub-call to the software pools available based on that user to create this service template. Could be Sysman, could be another user. You don't have to be Sysman to do this. As long as you have cloud administrator privileges on that user, they would be able to do these things. And then they would pull this ID as an input variable for this particular pool in this particular zone. And these details are standard. Then we've got the profile component URN. Now this is actually the reference to the DB profile or service template we're going to use. This is in actually two places here. So how do we get this? In this particular case, if we scroll down, you'll see this is also referenced here. So we need this as the service template we're going to use in order to create this database. Now, the service template in the database profile is essentially the blueprint for creating the database. So let's go to the command line interface and see how this works, because we talked about the command line interface working in conjunction with the RESTful API. So as we look at the command line interface, you'll see we need to log in first. So in this particular case, I'm logging in as sysman, but again, this could be another user with enough privileges to access the environment. We'll log in as sysman, and then what I want to do is, let's say as an example, I want to list the entities in the software library, and I want to pull everything that's got the DBCA, again, input variables here. So I can list all of the entities within the software library that have the word DBCA in them. This is the particular service template that I would like to use. So now I want to take one step further, and I want to pull that one, and I can pull that here. Now I can, again, with programming here, I can sort of tailor the output here. So this is actually an input variable into the RESTful API call, if you will, or the building of the RESTful API call based on the service template name that I want to use or make available, or the database profile that I want to make available for the service template. And in this particular case, I've sort of parsed it a little bit. So when I hit return on this, it's going to give me the line that I need to enter into the RESTful API. This is the exact line that I need in order to execute the RESTful call. So using EMCLI in conjunction with the RESTful API, I now have the capability to pull the exact line I need, which is right here. This would be the variable inbound. So then I've got the reference zone that we looked at here in the service pool. The service pool here, the reference zone is right here. So we can pull that from the same call. And you see we're sort of building out the completion of the JSON body for a creation of a service template. The reference hosts that will be in this particular service template. There's the pool that we looked at earlier. And in this particular case, I'm using file system storage. I could use ASM here as well. And then in that case, I would actually add details around the ASM groups, things of that nature. I'm turning log archive mode off, so I don't want log archive mode. So again, you see a number of variables here that we're going to incorporate into the service template. The service template is the blueprint for creating the database from an end user perspective. The end user does not enter any of this data. We've answered these questions ahead of time. That's why it's a simplification of a database build for that particular end user. So as we scroll down the context of this, you'll see, again, here's our URN we looked at earlier, our reference targets, and then we've got details around what sort of prefix we want on our SID, all possible input variables that the end user could type in, if you will, from a creation perspective specific to administration. Once we complete this, then we post and execute. So what this is going to do is this is going to create a service template. Now we're in as the cloud administrator currently. We're not an end user right now. This is the cloud administrator executing through an automated solution, as an example, the creation of the service template. So we hit send, and it will create the service template in Enterprise Manager. So you see down here we've got a positive return. It's created that service template. So in the interest of validation, let's go into Enterprise Manager's UI and go to the Cloud Administrator area, and let's take a quick look to validate that our service template is there. And here it is. So now we have a service template built on the RESTful API call here. Once this is finished, we can then close out, because now we've created and executed an administrative task specific to building a service template from the cloud administrator perspective. So now what I want to do is I want to go in, and I want to go in as an end user. So I want to log into Enterprise Manager's RESTful API as SSA P. Combs, which is my user, and I want to look at what's available for that particular end user. And as you saw with the sysman, we see the same thing for that particular user. Now, clearly there's not as much available, not as much there. Now you see our service template is here that's available to me based on the role that was assigned to this service template. So this user is clearly part of the role that was assigned to the service template when we created it. And again, you see some additional service templates. And then at the bottom here, you will see service family types as we had seen earlier. And then you'll see specific requests by this user only here. Deletion of databases, creation of things of that nature. So here's what you see here. So if we go more specifically to the create statement, as a user now, I want to ask for a database. I'm going to a portal. On the back end, I'm calling Enterprise Manager's RESTful API. So the end user, again, certainly doesn't see this. What we want to do is once we logged in as it relates to the basic, we want to pull or capture the service template that we want to use. So as an example, if we look more specifically, here's the service template we created through the administrative piece of the Cloud API. What I want to do is pull this and save this, because this is available to the end user now. When the end user asks for a particular database, we might list those templates. Now, they wouldn't see this, but they would see a nomenclature that you could list for them that would identify against that particular ID. The user would simply check it in the UI, and it would reference this particular ID for that particular service template that would give them what they needed. In this particular case, a 12CR1 single instance database with no standby. As you can see here, my standby requirement is set to false. If you're looking at it from a build perspective, the UI would simply give the user the capability to check a box. Do I want a standby database, yes or no? Which database do I want? I want a 12CR1 database that's single instance, and I don't want a standby, so I don't check the box. Or I check the box, and it would say true. So here's where you would manipulate the opportunity for the user in the back end, on the background. What you see here is an end user in the database itself. So when we create a database and database as a service, we need to ensure we have a user or an account on that database so that the end user can access it. And this is what you see here. So if you look at it from a portal perspective, calling the RESTful API, I simply want to know what kind of database do you want? Do you want a standby database? And what account you want created? So the end user would answer 3 questions in that portal, or you would feed 3 answers into this particular REST call from a fully automated perspective as an example, and it would create the database. So if we finalize this and simply hit send, we now see it's going to make a call and it's going to ask for a database. My service name. Actually, this is good. So you'll notice here that I had a service name that was already being used. So if we received an error, we could change it quickly and resubmit. And so now we have a request ID here of 141. So it's been initialized and scheduled. If we click directly on this, or we were to show this directly to the user, or we could send a return back to an automated solution, let's say Puppet or Chef as an example, we could send back a return code based on the status initialization. If we click on this link and go in as this user, we can see we've got details. It's creating the database as we speak, in progress. So from an automation perspective, we could re-query this occasionally, provide status back to the automated tool to let them know that we're actually executing something and it hasn't failed, and keep executing this particular call to ensure that the end users or the automated solution received a positive return. So let's take a look at it from an Enterprise Manager's UI perspective. Again, only validating that the execution is taking place, because again, we record everything that's happening, even if it's a RESTful call, through Enterprise Manager's common framework. So if we go to the UI and we go to Enterprise, Provisioning and Patching, and Procedure Activity, we'll notice that that database is being created as we speak by this particular user. And we can see that as well on the back end from an Enterprise Manager perspective, recording the current status of this particular build. Now, once this completes, we would then receive information, and you'll see this when it completes, connect string information, more details about the account that was created. So we can return this information to the end user, or we can capture these as input variables as a return back to the automated solution to do further execution. So if you look at this from an automated, fully automated perspective, we're returning information back to the centralized orchestration tool, letting them know things are good, that we're executing accordingly, things are moving as they see fit. Once it completes, we provide critical data that's going to be needed to further integrate, again, TNS Connect details as an example, to integrate with the middleware stack and the application itself. providing context-sensitive details around this particular build as it relates to the user accounts that were created out there. So we want to provide that information so that if we're not going to have an end-user interaction, we want to provide those as captured input variables for further execution in a fully automated solution. And so we keep moving forward with this in progress, and this will create the database. While we're waiting for that, we can check the ID here as well. Now, the ID that you see at the end of this here, the 141, actually correlates. If we go back to the basic URL and log in as this user, you'll notice at the end of the return, if we scroll all the way down to the end, you'll notice that this particular call has been recorded for this particular user here. Once it succeeds, it'll show up here as an execution is created. So there's 139. It'll record it at the end of it. Once it succeeds, it'll show up here. The number correlating back to the execution is always at the end of the execution itself. You'll notice that also in the UI. So if you had any questions as to what the execution number was, it's actually sitting right at the end of the call, even in the UI. So we're actually executing 141. And we send the authorization, and you see here, this particular piece is also executing. So we're seeing the same exact thing here, just doing a check request data. It's the same exact call. Once this completes, then we have the opportunity to delete. And what you'll see in the delete here is a list of resource instances. So first we want to find out, list all the resources that are available to that particular user. And that's what you see here. So there are no assets to this user right now. We click on this particular detail here. And what we'll see is, once it's created, we'll have a total instance availability here, and we'll see this particular instance listed. So we can continue to check status on this particular instance. And again, as you see here in the UI, as we talked about earlier, we also see the same details in the UI itself. And this usually, in this particular environment, usually takes about 7 minutes. So we got about 3 more minutes on this particular execution. And once this completes, then we can list those instances and we can get the ID required to delete. The delete is actually a put on one call based on the ID for that particular. So what you could do in the UI when you're building out, or you could automate this. Let's say as an example, we've got the creation of the database asset based on extraction of source code from a source control system. They execute, they change, they test, they validate, and when they were to reintroduce the code or check the code back in to the source control system, you could theoretically make an automated call to the RESTful API and Enterprise Manager and delete the database asset automatically. So this would further automate the solution end to end. So really what the end user did was simply check out the code. Check out the code, get a notification that their asset's been created, execute, manipulate the code, test the code, check the code back in. Once the code's checked back in, we make a call to delete the asset automatically. The user never talked to anybody to ask for a database. The user never interacted with anything other than the source control system, and they got the assets they needed quickly with full automation, no touch from an infrastructure perspective, and then we released that asset when the end user was complete or finished with that particular asset. So once this creates, we'll take a look at the deletion of the particular database itself. While we're waiting for that, I want to take a quick look at the RESTful API cookbook. So this is the RESTful API cookbook as Martin outlined earlier. The objective of this document really was to provide a really nice best practices roadmap on how to execute. One of the things we wanted to do was provide some information about how to sort of validate your JSON bodies. I like to use this particular JSON JSON code validation tool. There's a lot of them out there on the internet. This one actually is pretty easy, pretty cut and dry. And so what we do is we simply just drop our body in and just validate. So as an example, if I was to actually take something out, it would actually show me an error in that particular space. I was missing something there. It would give me some context details as to what it was looking for, what it expected. Putting the comma back in, it validates my JSON. This is kind of important because when you start looking at these JSON bodies, they get kind of complicated and the syntax has to be exact, as we all know. So it really is nice to look at a particular validation tool, and this is the one I like to use. If we go back to the cookbook itself, some good information around administration, and again, pre- and post-script execution. So with all of these service templates, we have the capability, as outlined earlier a bit, pre- and post-execution. So let's say, as an example, we have a service template, and after the database is created, again, fully automated from an orchestration solution, we wanted to automatically also update a configuration management database. This is where you would execute a Perl script, as an example, to extract dynamic variables about that database build and update those via the command line, or excuse me, via the CMDB API. Totally automated. Same thing goes for the delete. Prior to a deletion, we could run a backup of the database of our man script, as an example. In post-database deletion, we could take it out of configuration management databases automatically. Another good use case there is post-database creation. We can actually integrate with your security framework. Whether that's identity management, whatever the case may be, we can integrate that database into that security framework in a fully automated fashion. So as you know, the use case I had mentioned earlier around code extraction from a source control system, once that database is created, we still need to maintain all the security framework, all the authentication and entitlements for that particular database. We can do this with a post Perl script, as an example, against that particular database and that security framework. And then, of course, some examples of some operational implementation as well. So if we scroll down, look at some of the details here. What we wanted to do is provide all the information needed to implement the command line interface. The JSON body validation tool, we provide recommendations here, as we've outlined earlier. And the integration opportunities we wanted to discuss, creation and administration of zones. So this is the actual call to create a zone. And you see here on the left-hand side, the EM command line interface execution that would be required in order to enter something within that particular environment. So again, getting things like the credential GUID, as an example, is something we would need in the body of this particular JSON call. And so that's what you would use to get that particular credential. And that actually is right here. So that's how you would actually get that. So we wanted to provide something that was going to give you the capability to pull things cleanly and easily. So the EM CLI and the RESTful API work closely together. If we scroll down further, you'll see things and examples on pool creation. So here's how I would get my targets that I would need from an Oracle home perspective, because a pool is essentially an Oracle home or a group of Oracle homes. And again, if we scroll down further, we've got credential requirements here. And then a creation of quotas. So we could administer the quotas as well through the RESTful API. Moving on further, we've got resource administration capabilities, database profile creations through EM CLI here, and provided some good information on best practices around provisioning, the flow of implementation of database as a service is seen here. And of course, the offerings, the service templates we want to offer here. Moving on down, we wanted to give you some context around creating the service templates themselves. So this is how you would create an 11G R4 with standby using a database template. This is going to create the service template that the end users would call later. And as you see here, I've got details as it relates to the RESTful call that would be made in order to get the resource details for the zone here. And as well, we've got the EM CLI call to pull what we had seen earlier, which is the URN number requirement that would relate to the database profile that I want to use for this particular service template. So this is the same context that you'd seen earlier when we were doing the RESTful call itself. Scrolling on down further, You'll see we've also got one for 12C. And if we move on down further, there's some specific details around service pre and post scripts. So this is an example of a Perl script that would be pre and post. So this is an actual output of what you would see when you created a database. So you see all the details here. This is an example of a list of all the variables that are available to you to put in a Perl script post-database creation. If we scroll on down a little further, you've got an actual Perl script that parses these things. And this particular script has some input variables here and an execution as an execution here to make directories as an example. This is an actual integration with a particular security framework. So we scroll on down further, you'll see some specific details on how to implement that particular or create a particular command line interface execution or PostScript creation. Because all of the PostScripts are actually saved in the software library. So let's go back to the RESTful API and check our status on our database build. Okay, so the database is ready. So we've got our database name, the database ready status. We see the details here on the connect string. We want to provide that to the user. We've got some additional details on uptime. So if we wanted to actually provide, when the user logs in, some initial understanding of the uptime and details there. We've got some additional details on space, CPU. So a lot of good information about the status of this particular build for this particular database. So if we go back to listing and we go in as sysman, we'll see a listing of all of the services available, and we see our listing there. So here's our database we just built, owned by this particular user's status up. This is the global UID for this particular database creation. I want to capture this and make it available to the end user to delete. So they would have a list of databases as an example that would be referenced by this global UID. Now, of course, the end user or the automated solution would reference this. The users would not see this information. So we would make a call then to delete this database based on that particular ID. And so what we're doing here is, if you look at it in the context of full automation, we're now deleting this database because the users are finished with the database, as indicated earlier with the use case around source code. They're finished with the database. They've checked the code in. We know the ID for the database that they asked for or requested earlier. We construct the URL. We do a put. We execute the headers accordingly, and we delete this database. So when I hit send on this, it's going to go into Enterprise Manager, and it's going to submit the deletion of that database. So there's our ID for deletion. So we can check the status of that 142 here by just simply changing the name on the end here, or the ID on the end, logging in, and we see here the deletion has been created. And so we can watch this until the deletion is finished. So it's in progress right now. Again, we'll go back to the UI just for validation that Enterprise Manager is watching everything you do regardless of UI or RESTful API. And here we see it's deleting the database. So we go back to the RESTful API, and it will delete the database in progress, and it's destroying the database as we speak. So this is a nice overview quickly of the capabilities of the RESTful API in conjunction with the EM command line interface. As you've seen, there's a lot of capability here. The last thing I want to look at from a demonstration perspective is an example of a call from the command line. So what I've done here is created a really basic script that will call, this is a K-shell script, very basic. Obviously, you could do this in Python, you could do this in Java, whatever your language flavor is. And what I wanted to do is just provide a quick context here of what this looks like. So I've created a script here, and this curl is going to call the URL that we had in the RESTful API in Postman, and I've parsed it a little bit and sort of turned it into some variables there. So I hop out of this and we want to execute this, I would simply provide input variables to the user ID, which would be sysman in this case, or we could use the SSA, the Combs, and the password input variable would be dynamic as an example, in this case welcome1, and it'll call in. And so you see the same return that we had seen through Postman. So this is extremely powerful, a lot of capability. Just a quick example of what that would look like, and then of course we would parse this and present it to the end user as an example, or we would parse this and present the returns to a fully automated solution. So we'll go back to Postman, take a quick look at our delete, and our delete looks like it's complete. We successfully completed it. So this database is no longer available to this particular end user, and that completes the life cycle of an execution for the RESTful API. So let's recap. From an administrative perspective, we created a service template. We used a standard body with input variables to create the service template, and we could certainly create another service template as we speak. We can change and redefine the roles. We used EM command line interface as well as additional calls to the RESTful API for input variables, which you saw here, and is, of course, what you saw here through the EM command line interface. We then executed the creation of the service template. Once we created the service template, we then logged out and logged back in as an end user and created a database based on the availability of the resources available to that particular end user with the home page call, if you will, to the RESTful API. Presenting these to an automated solution or presenting them to the user with whatever front end you would see fit. Created the database, statused the database, and then deleted the database. And of course, we took a look at a quick K-shell script with curl. So let's go back, and of course, we looked at the RESTful API cookbook to give you guys some best practices on how to execute that. So that's a nice overview of the RESTful API for database as a service in conjunction with the EM command line interface. Hope you enjoyed and hope it gets you guys down the road with fully automation with your DevOps opportunities. Thank you.
Pat, thank you very much. That was a great presentation and demo. At this point, I'd like to see if we have any questions from our audience. You can unmute yourself by pressing #6. And I do see one chat question on there. I'm not sure if it was answered from Kevin. When customizing DPs, how do I know which built-in interface, which variables I can use in different shell languages? For example, K-shell or Perl.
I have answered it, Martin. Basically, the deployment procedures which is used by the cloud management pack or the self-service users, they are not available for customizations. And the variables which Kevin are looking for, I've posted the link from where he can pick up all those input variables.
Okay, thank you, Shubhadeep. Any other questions from our audience?
This is Francis from Home Depot. Do we have RESTful API that we can that integrate into PCF?
Shubhadeep, if you want to take that, or you want me to? Yeah, the short answer is, short answer is you're talking about Cloud Foundry. The short answer is yes. Yeah, the short answer is yes. It'd be the same call to the RESTful API to provision the assets in that particular space.
Okay. Is there a link or some form of documentation for that that we can review internally?
Yeah, we can certainly take it offline. I've actually done some work with Cloud Foundry myself, and sort of, for lack of a better term, played around with it a little bit. So let's take this offline. Definitely we should get together and look at the use case and sort of construct something that's going to be more specific to your liking.
Okay. Is this Patrick?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay. Francis from Home Depot. That's fine.
Yeah.
I'll send you email.
Yeah. Let's chat. Absolutely.
Okay. Thanks.
Any other questions?
Okay, it looks like we have no more questions and perfect timing with the top of the hour. So I'd like to thank everyone for attending today. Hope you found this enjoyable, and very much would like to thank Pat for the presentation and demo, and Shubhadeep for helping out with the Q&A. So thank you everyone for attending, and have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.